Ahora tenemos el gran placer de hacer una mesa redonda con nuestro invitado especial también, Jonathan Berte de la Fundación Sol. Muchas gracias por estar aquí y lo vamos a hacer todo en inglés. Lo siento, mi colega, la intérprete de conferencias ahí, pero vamos a cambiar, switch to English right now. Entonces, pongan sus auriculares. Jonathan Berte is the founder, chairman of the board and driving force behind RoboVision, which is a leading artificial intelligence solution provider from Belgium. And beyond RoboVision, Jonathan is a regular guest lecturer at institutions such as the London School of Economics, Warwick Business School, and Ghent University. And Jonathan also serves on the Sol Foundation's board of directors as chair of the European Union Advisory Board, and he serves on the Technology and Investment Advisory Board. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. Happy to be here.
Yes. Now, you heard the presentation of Francisco. Thank you very much, Francisco. It was very fascinating. And applause for you for bringing the subject forward as being like the enfant terrible of the of the European Parliament. Now, Jonathan, when you hear Francisco, he said it may be we have to make sure that this process of dealing with the subject must not be interfered with by some other organizations who try to instrumentalize it, as I understood that. What does it make you think, you being part of a private think tank that tries to deal with the global repercussions of this subject, which is not only in politics, but also economy, religion, culture, and all of that?
I think a lot of work is being done, but not necessarily on the front stage. And that's really important because we have to take into account those people that fear the stigma. Behind the scenes can be much more efficient than in front, on the front stage. And that's the conviction of the Sol Foundation. Our mission is constituted on 3 pillars. It's to propel or to support the scientific research of this topic, to do lobbying for the policy changes, and also to educate the public. And I'm responsible for the European Union, for outside of US relationships. It's very difficult, but as I said, lobbying is at this moment more a behind the scenes thing going on.
Yeah. Francisco, are you afraid specifically that this topic will be instrumentalized by some political forces? And if so, which political forces and to what end?
Well, I think afraid is not the right adjective. I would say that it's a danger. It's a danger because there's a lot of work being done also, by very credible organizations. I would not say in the shadows, but in the second sphere, so to say, of influence. And that's work that is very professional, very credible, very science-based, can be undermined if then you have like a political voice that undermines this kind of efforts. We kind of see it on the topic of climate. We have all the science we need to talk about climate in a very scientific way, and how should we make a transition to a different type of economy, different type of society that benefits all. But now we are being pushed by a narrative that is very negative, and it even questions the scientific data that we have in a lot of sectors. And so if this happens in a topic that is so in-depth in our society, like climate change and all the repercussions, this should easily be transposed to UAPs. And I think that's one of the dangers that we might have if we don't have moderate, rational politicians talking about this topic.
So in this negative narrative that you're referring to, what exactly do you mean by this?
Well, first of all, the evidence that we already have from a lot of professionals that they see and report something. If, for example, we have violence on the streets and someone reports it, the authorities are willing to consider those testimonies and act on it. But if you talk about the UAP, it's disconsidered. So it's not very rational. And so when we look at the evidence that we already have it in different ways, we can already understand there's something missing. And so there's a huge gap between the professionals, the scientific academy. It was a very interesting interview of Rose Coulthard with Michio Kaku, talking about this. We now have so much evidence that something is happening that we should be evaluating more. We should be questioning more. We should having more improvements also on technology to understand what is happening. Because in the end, let's put it this way, it can be nothing. Okay, but then let's put the resources, let's put the debates there, so we can definitely know what it is and what is not. And if you don't go that way, we open the doors to all types of conspiracies and all types of considerations.
Now, at the Stanford University, the inaugural act in November 23 of the Sol Foundation, the experts there were quite concerned that when this subject comes to the table, there may be some real bad repercussions on societies, which is something that cannot only be dealt with in the framework of politics, I guess. So what is the role of the Sol Foundation in all of this? And what have been your experiences so far in dealing with politicians in helping bring this subject forward?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the speech of Hal Puthoff and his experiences with this Washington conference in the early 2000s. And let's be honest, the outcome of such a conference, I think with 50 scientists or something, was negative in a way. It was negative as an advice for disclosure. So I think that should really also sink in that disclosure, disruptive disclosure, radical disclosure, all of a sudden will not be positive for society. So it needs like a playbook. It needs some kind of a dissemination strategy in order to really educate the public, avoid certain panic reactions in some groups. And that has been going on for decades. So be honest, there is a lot of discussion behind the scenes around us. We, of course, have like statements from Margaret Thatcher, allegedly during dinners that she said like the people cannot know this after the Rendlesham Forest incident. But it's our role to really, for the first time in the history, solidify a scientific movement with funding, with academics of high standards to investigate all of these aspects of disclosure, not only the technological aspect, but also the sociological and the psychological aspect. And there are pioneers before us that have initiated this, like John Mack at Harvard University, but it always has some kind of ebbed away. So it's kind of an interesting thing with this subject that it's a bit like the history of AI. You have this summer and winters and this kind of waves of disclosure almost happening, like the Carter administration. But it's really difficult, and I really think that disclosure could come from outside of the US, and especially the European Union has a special role because a lot of problems are related to the data. There is not enough data because you cannot just do things on hearsay, and even those pilots' reports are credible. They're being smashed by Mick West of this world that say like, yeah, but it's Starlink nevertheless. So I think there is a special role for the European Space Agency to really unleash this data to open science, to movements that can just work and see on the data that there are anomalies. And let's start from that. We don't know anything. Maybe it's a military program, but then at least we have some kind of an entry to what it could be. What is for sure, and what I stated in my Sol Foundation talk, is that there is something in our skies that has other energy sources, other kinds of propulsion technology that could be really interesting for energy quests in this world, and especially for the European Union. So my personal driving force here is to take that angle, the angle of technology, because that's my background, in order to lobby the people at the highest levels and say like, let's have an informal discussion first with some people in Washington. Why are they saying the things they say? Why is Marco Rubio so passionate about the topic? And And he's ultimately extremely powerful. He's one of the gang of 8 senators in the American establishment. So that shall already maybe move something in European politicians.
Let me just add on what you said. There's, I think, one big difference between the US and the EU is that the space is more militarized in the US, and here is more civil-based. And so that can be also a door for us to improve that path, not only to get funding, as I stated, because you can get funding if you have the political will to open that door, but then obviously to understand the civic and civil responsibilities of analyzing that data. That in the US is mainly correlated to military, national defense, those kind of subjects, and here it's more academia, how can we improve technology, will this impact also our society. And so also on that perspective, I do agree with you that the EU can have a better path if we have the political leadership, obviously.
And that's the big problem, of course. On the level of technology, the European Union has no equals like Lockheed Martin and others. Not that we need to have them, but yeah, we need some kind of research on the topic. The only thing we have from the Nimitz incident, because people think we have data, is a statement of a radar operator that the object has moved at 10,000 meters in 0.7 seconds. Now, that's not data. That's also hearsay, let's be honest.
And according to the witnesses on board, the data was confiscated after the event. Now, I have a question, Francisco. In the beginning, I mean, Europe is a little bit behind the United States in terms of UAPs, right? In the beginning, December 2017, Luis Elizondo steps forward, presents the videos. The Pentagon slowly starts to admit that there is a real phenomenon. They are now at the point of saying, okay, there is a real phenomenon. We don't know what it is, and we have this body that organizes research about this. But now the narrative, and that is where we want to go, where we want to, the step that we want to achieve in Europe. But now the narrative has changed in the United States. Now it's about whistleblowers saying that these crashed craft have been recovered decades ago, and there are secret programs going on, and there's this technology that you just mentioned. And now for me the question is, first of all, while you were talking to your colleagues at the European Parliament, did you have the impression that they were worried that something like this may turn out to be true as well in Europe? That this narrative may change from, the mere presence, the mere existence of the phenomenon towards, okay, there have been secret programs, and that they would rather not touch it for this reason?
No. To be honest, the majority of the MEPs are not even talking about this subject. I had one that directly contacted me because he was inquired by a citizen of the work that I was doing, and so he kind of came up to me and said, "Are you working on UAPs? What is the angle?" Because he was kind of surprised, and he was in my group, and so even that shows that the level of bubble that sometimes we are in. MEPs are working on their topics and their topics alone, and they don't see what's happening even behind them or outside or next to them. And unfortunately, I think that was the bit. There was one EPP member that made a tweet, I also remember this, that he was talking about this is where the tax money is going, because I was publicizing the event, and he was kind of bashing, saying, "Oh, now this guy is debating UAPs," kind of ridiculizing me. But I thought it was positive because at least he was talking about it. It was cool. I was not really struck by it. But it's almost none, the debate. And that's one of the problems that we have. There's no one talking about it. I don't think they want to talk about it because now we continue the same path. Oh, it's okay, the Ukrainian war, Gaza, the fight for democracy, the extreme rights, all the national things that at least in the US you have like a more centralized debate. Here it's everyone for themselves, each country debating whatever they want, and the commissioner that will be elected trying to hold up all the member states together so we can at least move something in European projects.
Now, I have a question for both of you. Now, if it turns out that this technology is real, free energy device, let's say, a small box which provides unlimited amounts of energy, if that really exists, what would be the repercussions of this technology being released into our world today with all the geopolitical mess that is going on? Do you think that it would even be possible to release such kind of energy technology in the current state of the world? And if not, what would be the political system of the future that would be required to be able to employ this kind of technology? And I'm asking that because I sense that you're a little bit worried that this whole process with UFOs may change the whole political institutions. And I say this also because you do work with these whistleblowers who talk about this technology. So who wants to go first?
I don't think that the world is ready for a disruptive release of this technology. It can be compared, for instance, with a zero-day bug in Microsoft code. If you release suddenly the code to an operating system, then all of a sudden, all these computers are at risk to crash or whatever, or to get all of your private data. It's a bit of the same with this kind of technology. I think we need, and that's exactly the role of Sol and other organizations in its field, to first understand this phenomenon in a scientific way, then to understand how it can be dispatched to humanity in a way, if it's there and if it's proven to be real, and then to give policy advice and educate the people of how to cope with it, because it's the world is for sure not ready for an energy device that is easy to make and has unlimited, because that's exactly an atomic bomb. It's also an energy device, but it's released in a very sudden way. And of course, if you have some other energy form, you can also make bombs of it. So we're not ready for that. Let's be honest.
For me, the main case is on the society as a whole, and civil and political level, because technology is neutral, as it was said. It's there, and it's us humans that use it in a different way. So we want to do this or we want to do that. Nuclear energy is the perfect example. And in the way, I think if we don't have these debates in a credible way, openly, also rethinking our institutions, we can see, for example, in simple things like the compliance of international law, the UN cannot do anything with the Council, with the Security Council, that one member can veto. And so we really have to rethink also our international organizations, namely the UN, because let's think about it. If we, at least two options, this technology is applied in society by humans. So imagine someone from the military complex starts to make correlations commercially with other companies, and it starts to be developed in a scale that is commercially available, and we are having a debate, we found a new technology. This is different if we understand that this technology comes from other sources and other beings, so to say, and other phenomena. If we do have this direction that there's something different that is not known in this world, and this technology comes from them or that, we have to rethink our humanity also, and our process of talking to each other, of even nation building and concepts that we now have that probably would be in their minds. But there's two options, and so it's a difficult path to navigate.
Yeah, I agree that we still live in some kind of a tribal culture. We're very similar to 3,000 years ago in fighting between groups of people for resources, and because we have other views on reality. And I don't think this kind of technology is compatible with this tribal culture.
Now, I have another question. We're not talking about only technology. We are also talking about this, whatever it is, non-human intelligence which created this technology, right? Whistleblowers are even claiming that there is contact between governments and this. Now, in 2008, two political scientists, Wendt and Duval, published an interesting paper in Political Theory, saying that UFOs are a taboo subject for politicians because there is simply no space left in the political system that we have nowadays, because political power is only shared among equals horizontally. There is no space vertically for potentially superior beings suddenly starting to interfere into our situation here on Earth. And so I want to ask you, as a politician, when you promote this, and this is a little provocative, but I'm like that. So when you are pushing this subject forward, aren't you afraid that you're contributing to abolish the role of politicians in the future? Because who would ask for your opinion when there is some higher, superior intelligence, and what is their maximum tax share that they have to pay,
I think as a species, we'll always organize ourselves. And so we, as it was said here by Jonathan, we are very tribal yet, still. But if we understand there's different intelligence and different life forms or different beings or whatever you want to call it, you have to rethink humanity. And humanity will have to speak also by its voice. Because, as for example, we now know, I have my house, you have your house. We have a building and we have to manage things. Even if you have a higher income or more resources, we still have to talk with each other to try to manage the building. And that can be correlated to the planets. If we are the main species, so to say, here in the planet, we will have to reorganize ourselves to have a platform to debate with these entities and to really understand how can we progress together. But again, I don't think it's possible if we continue this tribal mentality, and especially not question our values, because as I stated in the presentation, what we think it's damaging that they might do to us, we are still doing to other species that are sentient. And if you don't question our own values now, it will be very difficult for us even to try to make a conversation, be it how it is, but with other species saying, no, we are also intelligent, don't do this to us. We really have to rethink what we do to other species.
How about economy, repercussions on economy? Just imagine someone shows up and says, look, we have this marvelous transportation device. You push this button and you're in China. How would that... What I want to know, what is the challenge for economy in disclosing not only the technology, but also the fact that we are not alone, that there is some non-human intelligence?
I would just focus on economy first, but of course it's extremely disruptive because our economy is based on the petrodollar. Of course, it's under pressure with the alliance China and Russia right now, but you can imagine if you're the biggest company in the world, Aramco, if you hear about this, you're going to do something about it probably because you have the means and you want to protect your income and so on. So I do believe that this might have been one of the reasons that things about this technology were not known or not communicated in the past, because there is a lot of power involved in the whole petro economy.
Jonathan, speaking of this current political process that's going on in the United States, we see new laws, this UAP Controlled Disclosure Act is being tried to reintroduce into the National Defense Authorization Act, although we don't know yet if it's going to pass. But what is happening? Can you tell us a little bit what is happening behind the scenes? What is currently going on in the United States, and what is the Sol Foundation's role in this?
What is happening is that a lot of this legislation is being written by staffers, obviously, and by relationships between staffers. And that's also one of the biggest problems, because the staffers are the main communicators with the whistleblowers, the main communicator with the pilots even, telling their stories of things that cannot be made by humanity. And the problem is that these staffers are under pressure right now with the turmoil, the election turmoil, to find new jobs, to go to the industry. If you look at Mike Gallagher, he's left Congress right now. He's going to Palantir, I heard. So a lot of the smart people are leaving. So it's a real challenge for the Sol Foundation to build this relationship again with new staffers, with new right hands of politicians. And that's what we see right now is quite some confusion, because a generation of staffers, a generation of very talented people is leaving politics and is making it's into a hard homework for lobbying organizations such as the Sol Foundation. And that's what we see, is that it's not yet fully clear whether we have the ambassadors and the power to amend the new NDAA Act for 2025. There's a lot of confusion about it.
Okay, so we still don't know whether something is going to come forward or not next year.
Well, of course, there is still, some of you might know the colloquia of Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer. They're very passionate about the topic, and that passion is from a generation before. Barry Goldwater, Harry Reid, and they gave this message like, please do something about it. We also know that John Podesta, in the interview when he left the administration, said like, answer it, like, what is the single thing where you are most disappointed about? And he said like that there was no more openness about this whole UFO topic. So there are forces that are playing out right now. And yeah, some of you might know the statements of Carl Nell at the SALT conference, but there are two options: or you have catastrophic disclosure, or you have the political way. Dave Grush, unlike Edward Snowden, has chosen a very official path with the known paths, legal pathways that are there for whistleblowers. But it's not easy. It's not easy, and some might even hope that there is more force and power with this whistleblower coming out. But some also forget that the United States is a national security state. There are military laws that if you disclose the highest top secret, the military can just kill you and you will not read it in the newspaper.
And that is, and obviously it's also not the case in the European Union that you can start to, let's say, propose a law like this. Like, it's in the end, it's the European Commission that decides, right? Now the question is whether there is an influence from the United States onto the European Commission to go forward or not with a subject like UAP. What do you think of that?
Well, you said U.S. You mean the politicians in U.S.
Yeah.
Congress?
Yeah.
It depends. There's a lot of paths that you can take, and normally these kind of topics, I would say, are debated at the shadow, so to say. So you take your time, you evaluate the situation, you give information to certain, because normally you don't talk directly to von der Leyen, you talk to the staff, you talk to the organization that is around the commissioner or the president commissioner, and you build up that relation, and it takes time because they have 20,000 things to do. And UAPs is not probably the most sexiest topic to talk about it. But if you've opened the door, you have the path to talk with them. But again, it's what he says. Elections always kind of make it volatile, this relation, because you can end up not having von der Leyen as a commissioner. We don't know. As a president of the commission, we don't know.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention in the European context as well is I know a lot of pilots, also military operators, radar operators, that are not allowed to talk with members of the European Parliament because they are under security clearance, and it's a NATO security clearance. So in a way, the alliance, the military alliance that we have in Europe, is secrecy controlled by the United States in such a way that our citizens cannot talk with you because of obligations they have to the biggest financer of the NATO alliance, obviously. And that is something that we really need to flag as a whole in our democracies, because they also have very profound stories about things that are under other kinds of propulsion or energy control.
That is very interesting, and it could open the way also for us to improve the legislation on whistleblowing, for example.
Agreed.
So there's a lot of paths. If you have the political will, we can search paths to improve this on this topic for sure.
Excellent. So let me ask you my last question, and I ask you to give a very quick answer because we're running out of time. But we're always talking about problems and everything is going to change. We don't know the geopolitical situation. I think what we have in terms of UAP is now a lack of vision of positive vision. What is your positive vision for the future that includes the reality of non-human intelligence and their technology on our planet?
Well, to go back to the statements of Reagan before the United Nations in the 80s, I think if we would be aware that there is another kind of intelligence, humanity would have a more uniting force, especially in relationship to the technology that can solve so many problems. But we may not use that technology, that potentially disruptive technology, either energy or military, to fight in a tribal way. So we need to raise our consciousness in such a way that we're ready for a potentially a new phase in humanity.
What's your positive vision?
Well, I would say that it's mainly on the civil society. There are a lot of NGOs, organizations that are doing a wonderful job, and not to undermine the role of politicians, but they are pressed to do something if they have the will of the people behind them. And so the more you talk about these topics, the more you question your congressman, your MEP, your national parliamentary. All these steps are relevant for us to open the debates and to reduce the stigma surrounding the topic. Because there are a lot of stigma still surrounding the topic, and if we continue to talk about this in a stigmatizing way, we will not reach the level that I think we all want, that is to have a better understanding of these phenomena and the real repercussions in our society.
And I hope, and my positive vision is that as science is taking this subject more and more seriously, which is about to happen now, right now, we have lots of conferences going on about this, and that we start to get rid of this stigma so that politicians like Francisco and his colleagues, but also people like from the Sol Foundation, have that it's easier for them to proceed with their work and to bring this subject forward, because I think it's part of mankind, and we just have to deal with the fact that we are not the brightest candle on the cake. Thank you so much, Jonathan Berte, Francisco Guerreiro. Thank you.
La dirigida.
Entiendo español.
No, perfecto, es que yo no sé inglés, pero, por ejemplo, mientras que cuando estaba el presidente Obama, Barack Obama, había una cierta esperanza de apertura. Has nombrado a John Podesta, había allí mucha gente trabajando para dar a conocer el fenómeno. ¿Qué opina o qué tendencia tiene el presidente actual, Biden, sobre esto? ¿Hay alguna esperanza? ¿Qué trabajo hace la Fundación Sol para quizás hacer presión gubernamental para que esto salga a la luz? Porque tenemos que tener algo de esperanza. Los que llevamos 45 años como yo, esperando una respuesta, yo ahora no veo. Con Obama sí, veía cierta tendencia a la apertura. Él ha hecho muchas declaraciones, muy simpático, pero esto se ha acabado, ¿no? ¿Qué opina John Biden? ¿Qué tendencia tiene? ¿En el gobierno americano hay una tendencia positiva o vamos a tener que esperar otro presidente?
Well, it's only
¿Qué trabajo hace la Fundación Sol? Gracias.
So the question for the English audience was like, what is the current attitude of the Biden administration towards potentially disclosure or UAP topic? Because in the Obama administration, there seemed to be more openness. And what do we know with the Sol Foundation? What is probably happened behind the scenes? First of all, we're not in the White House, so this is all assuming. The words in the corridor are that the Biden administration is under so much pressure with the Gaza conflict and with the elections and the whole portraying of Biden as being too old for the next presidency, that this is clearly one problem too much. That being said, there is a circle around him that has their own passions. For instance, John Podesta, we all know, but they need to walk the line, of course. So what we had in the past with the Carter administration and with the Obama administration, but let's be clear, it's quite obvious that American presidents are not necessarily briefed about the topic. Some of you have seen the interview with Trump that was released yesterday about UAP. He talked about 4 minutes about it. It was quite, it was really strange. But he accepted that it was extremely weird. He outed himself as a non-believer, but maybe that's scripted. We don't know. Ross Coulter claimed that Trump was informed, but backed down because he was threatened somehow. I'll leave it at that. That being said, I think the next president will have more leeway, because it will be, in case of Biden, a president that is doing his last segment, the second legislature, and in the case of Trump, we all know that he will do anything. So that being said, I don't know whether that's a positive thing. Because I still abide by my statements of before that this needs to be done in a very careful way.
And if the United States president decides to go forward with this, I'm sure that this would open the floodgates as well at the European Commission. Okay, so thank you very much, Jonathan Berte, Francisco Guerreiro. Muchas gracias,